Welcome to LivingLifeDyingDeath.com, the place for healthy conversations about death and dying. I'm Jennifer Collins Taylor, and I'm here with Robert Neimeyer, Dr. Robert Neimeyer. Thanks for joining me again today, talking about your experiences.
Thank you. I feel privileged to have a second day of conversation with you, and I sense that my life would be richer if I had the conversation every day, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks once more for making the time.
I appreciate it. We talked a little bit today about meaning reconstruction, and I'd like to go back and revisit that a little bit in the idea of the way we tell our stories and then we retell them, and how we give permission to ourselves or don't give permissions to ourselves to listen.
One of the interesting things is that I think we seek not so much in our storytelling simply the historical truth of what has happened to us as an objective reality. We seek a kind of narrative truth. We seek a story that evolves as we do. And if we think about perhaps losses and transitions we experienced in our early years, maybe even in childhood, we look back on them now with adult eyes and listen to those same stories as we tell them with our adult ears, then we find that the stories have often changed, not because the life events have, but because the narrator has. And so I think it is a useful thing to think of stories as something that evolve along with us. And we listen generously to the stories of loss told by others when we allow those same stories to be told, perhaps repeatedly, exploring new dimensions, new aspects of them.
And they have all truths in them.
That's right, that the emotional truth of the story is something that is changing because it must be true to who we are emotionally now. And how I hold the experience of what is literally an event in my life, my father's suicide, which occurred before my 12th birthday. The way in which I hold that now in midlife is certainly different than the way in which I held it as a young boy on the threshold of adolescence or a late teen, trying to find a way forward in the devastation of that loss. And even as a young adult, as I was teaching my first course on death and dying. And so I do think that we treat ourselves and others generously when we let the stories continue and let the stories grow with us and with our lives.
Well, that theme yesterday, in one of the presentations that you gave, I heard you say and asked us as the attendants at the conference to go to the dark places, to go to the places that might have suffering and pain and confusion in them. And I'd like you to expound on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, often we provide others a carefully edited account of our lives that sanitizes it, that takes all the untidy and hurtful and difficult bits and sweeps them under the carpet. And I'm with you in saying that at least sometimes in our lives, at least in some places, whether it is in the raw honesty of a blog, whether it is in listening to the account of another in a support group, whether it's in those private conversations between trusted confidants or soulmates, we need spaces where we can enter the heart of darkness with people, and when we ourselves can find the voice to speak of the despair, the confusion, the searching, right along with the perception of possibility and light and hope, that somehow we need to have a narrative container, a story that is big enough to hold all of that. I might ask, how is this changing for you across time compared to how it was a few months ago, right, when this first happened to you? How do you hold it now differently? And if you were to look into that murky crystal ball of our futures, how do you imagine this would be for you 6 months or a year down the road? Would it have moved you any closer to the kind of answers that you seek or the kind of life you want to recover or invent? And so I am listening to an evolving story, really, and I want to be responsive to all parts of that.
So telling and retelling of the stories in the full capacity of what might be there. Well, that's sounds like a very interesting part of your practice.
Well, and I think it's a practice. This is not only my professional practice, but believe it or not, as socially incongruous as this may seem, it's highly likely to find its way into my personal conversations with people, because I'm likely to to listen for what people want to say and yet cannot quite find words for. And I will, just in my attitude of signaling openness to hearing that story, often let them move into a fuller telling. And that may take place in a cocktail party or a hallway conversation, almost as much as in the therapy office.
Great. I would like to ask you if you're personally afraid to die.
I'm not afraid of the state of death, but the idea of getting there doesn't thrill me. As most people our age can surely account, we have already lost many and much, and we will lose everyone and everything else, at least in an earthly sense, before, between the point of our taping this interview and the point of the ending of our own lives. And so in that way, we witness many forms of transition, and not all of them are pretty. Not all of them present death with dignity. So I see that as something to aspire to, but also to be realistic that the healthcare system and human limitation being what it is, not all of us will approach death in the way that we would prefer. And I think for me that is both a source of anxiety and a source of motivation to try to humanize discourses, professional, personal, about death and loss, in order to do a better job of that, to support people during hard times of suffering, maybe disability, growing physical limitation or pain, to find ways of addressing core concerns.
And feeling some kind of, not necessarily comfort, but an understanding that there's going to be uncertainty.
That's right, yes.
So how can we hold uncertainty and hope at the same time?
I do believe that we are able to hold these kind of fundamental contrasts, even almost conflicts, and to recognize that the dilemma of being human leaves us with both positions sometimes at the same time. And this is, I guess, a part of a life philosophy that in some measure maybe you and I share, a philosophy that might be rendered in terms of, first, grow comfortable with ambiguity. Right. Secondly, I might say steer into threat, which means when we sense something that is threatening or a source of anxiety, rather than coping with a kind of avoidance, to explore that, to make it less anxious by mastering it, finding words for it, seeking the most constructive response to a difficult situation.
And allow human resilience to rise up?
Absolutely, within us and between us. That I am very hopeful, and I daily watch acts of great bravery, great courage in the adaptation of people who are struggling with great loss, and yet who inspire me positively with the way in which they make meaning of that and find affirmative life lessons to carry into their lives and the lives of others.